There is a specific kind of silence that settles over a room when you realize the person who promised to protect you is the very person erasing you. I was 34 years old when I sat in the dim, cramped confines of a service pantry, listening to the muffled laughter of high society just beyond the drywall. My name is Elena, and for 7 years, I believed my marriage to Julian was a partnership built on shared sacrifices. But that night, as the expensive silk of my gown brushed against boxes of industrial detergent, the illusion didn't just crack, it shattered completely. I could hear Julian's voice through the service door, smooth and charming, introducing himself to the city's elite. He sounded so confident, so independent, as if he had walked into that gala entirely self-made, leaving the woman who paid for his degree hidden away like an embarrassing secret among the mops and spare linens. To understand how I ended up in that pantry, you have to understand the life Julian and I built from nothing. When we met in our mid-20s, we were both broke, living on instant noodles and big dreams. I worked 2 jobs, one as a data entry clerk by day, and another checking coats at a jazz club by night, just to support us while Julian finished his master's degree. I didn't mind the chapped hands or the aching lower back. I loved him, and I believed in his vision. Our home was a small, drafty apartment where the radiator clanked all night, but it smelled like the vanilla candles I bought on sale to make it feel warm. Julian used to hold my rough hands, look into my eyes, and promise that one day he would give me the world. He would say my quiet strength was his anchor. But success has a strange way of changing a person's memory. When Julian finally landed a high-paying executive role at Harrison Global, the clanking radiator was replaced by central heating, and my sacrifices were slowly rewritten as mere footnotes in his grand story. He began suggesting I stay home, whispering that I deserved a break, but looking back, I realized he just wanted me out of the professional sphere. He stopped inviting me to corporate dinners, claiming they were dry and boring. His tone grew polished, distant, and carefully curated. He started criticizing the way I dressed, the way I laughed, and even the simple meals I prepared with care. The warmth in our home began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, corporate efficiency. The first real clue that something was deeply wrong came 3 weeks before the annual Harrison Global Gala. I found a receipt in Julian's coat pocket for a designer boutique, a tailored, midnight blue tuxedo and a stunning, silver cocktail dress, size 2. I am a size 8. When I gently questioned him about it while pouring his morning coffee, his hand tensed around his mug. He didn't look at me. Instead, he forced a dry chuckle and said it was a corporate gift for a client's wife, a standard public relations expense. But his eyes were darting, and for the first time in our marriage, his voice carried a sharp, defensive edge that made my stomach drop. The slow burn of suspicion began to tighten in my chest, a heavy intuition telling me that the man I shared a bed with was living a double life. The suspicion turned into undeniable betrayal on the evening of the gala itself. Julian had told me the event was strictly for upper management and their primary investors, explicitly stating spouses weren't invited. Trusting him, I planned a quiet evening at home. But around 8 p.m., his assistant, a kind young woman named Sarah who didn't know about Julian's deception, called my cell phone to ask if I had arrived yet, mentioning that every executive had brought their partner. My heart stopped. I drove to the Grand Plaza Hotel in a daze, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Slipping past the busy front desk, I entered the ballroom foyer. There, under the crystal chandeliers, I saw my husband. He was standing with his arm tightly wrapped around the waist of a young, glamorous woman in a silver dress, laughing elegantly as he introduced her to his colleagues as his fiancée. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I didn't scream or make a scene, the dignity my mother taught me kept my spine straight. But as I moved forward to confront him, Julian spotted me. The color completely drained from his face. Before I could speak, he grabbed my elbow with a terrifyingly tight grip and whispered fiercely, "Don't ruin this for me, Elena. Not tonight." He practically dragged me down the hallway and pushed me into a large service pantry, locking the door from the outside to keep his dark secret hidden from his corporate world. The click of that lock turning from the outside was the loudest sound I had ever heard. For a few minutes, I stood entirely frozen in the dimness of the pantry, my back pressed against a shelf of stacked porcelain plates. The smell of lemons and heavy floor wax filled the air, a harsh contrast to the expensive French perfume I had sprayed on my wrists before leaving the house. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had scrubbed floors, typed endless data sheets, and rubbed Julian's shoulders when he was too stressed to sleep. Now, those hands were shaking. I could hear the faint, thumping bass of a live jazz band playing through the wall, accompanied by the muffled clinking of champagne flutes. Julian was out there, spinning a web of lies, while I was locked away like a piece of broken machinery. Anger, cold and sharp, replaced the initial shock. I didn't cry. My mother always said that tears are for grief, but clarity is for betrayal. I realized then that my compliance had made me invisible. By allowing Julian to slowly chip away at my presence in his life, I had handed him the chisel. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the fabric of my dress, and began looking for a way out. This wasn't a dungeon, it was a commercial pantry. I found a secondary door near the back, used by the catering staff to bring in fresh linens. I pushed it open and stepped into a quiet service corridor. Instead of running away to hide my shame at home, I walked straight back toward the main ballroom. I was done being hidden. When I stepped back out into the glittering light of the grand foyer, the sheer opulence of the event felt suffocating. Hundreds of people in tailored suits and silk gowns were mingling beneath towering floral arrangements. I caught sight of Julian across the room. He was holding a glass of champagne, his face animated as he spoke to a group of older men in tailored tuxedos. The young woman in the silver dress was still at his side, laughing at his jokes with a practiced ease. Julian looked completely relaxed, fully convinced that he had successfully contained his problem in the closet down the hall. He had no idea I was standing just 50 feet away, watching his masterpiece of deception fall apart in real time. As I began walking toward his circle, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a deeply commanding presence stepped directly into my path. He was holding a glass of sparkling water, and his sharp, intelligent eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me pause. It was Arthur Harrison, the reclusive founder and CEO of Harrison Global, a man Julian spoke of with absolute reverence and fear. I had seen his face on business magazine covers, but up close, he carried an aura of absolute authority. Instead of looking past me like most of the wealthy guests did, Arthur stared at me, a look of profound recognition washing over his stern features. "I've been searching for you all evening," Arthur said, his voice a rich, low baritone that cut through the surrounding chatter. I blinked, completely caught off guard. "I'm sorry, sir. I think you have me mistaken for someone else." Arthur smiled gently, a genuine warmth softening the lines around his eyes. "I rarely make mistakes, young lady. You are Elena, aren't you? The woman who authored the comprehensive market analysis report on logistics restructuring 2 years ago?" My breath hitched. "Yes, that was my work." "But, how do you know about that?" "Julian presented that report to the board." "Julian submitted it," Arthur corrected softly, taking a sip of his water. "But the data structure, the unique algorithmic modeling, and the sheer depth of human insight in those pages didn't match his previous work. I did some digging. I found the original digital drafts registered under your name and personal email on the company's external portal. I've wanted to meet the real brains behind that strategy for a very long time. But every time I asked Julian to bring his brilliant strategist to a corporate dinner, he made an excuse. Now I see why." Arthur's eyes shifted slightly past my shoulder, catching sight of Julian, who had just noticed us standing together. Julian's face went completely white. From across the room, I watched his polite corporate smile instantly freeze, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He quickly excused himself from his group and began walking toward us, his steps hurried and uneven, his pristine confidence evaporating with every inch he closed. Julian approached us like a man walking toward a ledge. I could see the fine beads of sweat glinting under the chandelier lights at his hairline, and the hand holding his champagne glass trembled so slightly that the liquid rippled. He desperately tried to force his signature, charming smile back onto his face, but his eyes were wide, darting between Arthur and me with a frantic, trapped energy. "Mr. Harrison," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave in a poor attempt to sound relaxed. "I see you've met Elena. She's an old family acquaintance. She actually brought some catering concerns to my attention, and I was just helping her resolve them." Elena, dear, you shouldn't trouble the CEO with minor details. Let me walk you out. He reached out to grab my arm again, his fingers tense, but before his hand could make contact, Arthur stepped forward just an inch. It was a subtle movement, but it carried the weight of an iron wall. An acquaintance, Julian? Arthur asked, his voice deceptively calm, yet cold enough to freeze the room. That's a rather detached word for the woman whose name is on the deed of your apartment, who carried you through your graduate studies, and whose intellect practically bought you your seat on my executive board. The silence that fell between the three of us was absolute. Julian's hand dropped to his side. The young woman in the silver dress had drifted over, looking confusedly between us, her perfect posture slipping as she realized the golden boy she was holding onto was rapidly unraveling. Julian, I said, my voice steady, carrying a quiet clarity that surprised even myself. You locked me in a pantry because you thought my presence would ruin your fragile little illusion. But an illusion is all you are. I turned my gaze directly to the young woman in the silver dress. Her name was Claire, as I would later learn, the daughter of a major regional investor. And for what it's worth, I added gently, he isn't a bachelor. He's my husband. Or at least, he was until tonight. Gasps rippled out from the immediate circle of guests who had paused to watch the interaction. In high society corporate circles, a scandal doesn't require shouting to be felt, it travels through sharp intakes of breath and shifting glances. Julian looked as though the ground had opened up beneath him. He looked at Claire, whose expression had hardened into pure disgust, and then at Arthur, whose face was completely unreadable. Elena, please, Julian whispered, his face completely drained of color, his career and his carefully constructed lie imploding in front of the very people he spent years trying to impress. We can talk about this at home. You're making a mistake. The mistake was mine, I replied, looking him dead in the eye. I mistook your ambition for capability, and I mistook your selfishness for love. I'm leaving now. Do not follow me. Arthur Harrison watched me with a look of profound respect. He tilted his glass slightly toward me. An impressive display of integrity, Elena. Please, step into my office down the hall tomorrow morning at 9. We have a legitimate position to discuss, one that actually belongs to you. I offered Arthur a polite, dignified nod, turned on my heel, and walked out of the ballroom. As the heavy glass doors closed behind me, I could hear the immediate buzz of whispers erupting in the hall. For the first time in 7 years, my chest felt light. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of rain and asphalt, and as I walked down the hotel steps toward a taxi, I didn't feel a single shred of regret. I had been pushed into the dark, but I had used the darkness to find my way into the light. The divorce was settled within 6 months, a quiet and clinical dismantling of a 7-year mistake. Julian tried to fight it at first, sending desperate text messages at midnight, leaving tearful voicemails professing his sudden realization of what we had lost. But I didn't answer the tears of a man who was only sorry because he got caught. When his greed was exposed, the board at Harrison Global launched an internal audit into his past projects. They discovered that nearly every major strategic success he had claimed over the last 3 years had been built entirely on my data, my research, and my sleepless nights. He wasn't fired with a loud explosion, he was quietly forced to resign, his reputation in the corporate sector tarnished beyond repair. Last I heard, he had moved back to his hometown, working a mid-level consultancy job, stripped of the grand title he had betrayed his own soul to achieve. Meanwhile, my life began to bloom in the spaces where his shadow used to fall. I accepted Arthur Harrison's offer and stepped into the role of Director of Market Strategy. The first morning I sat at my own desk, looking out over the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I didn't feel fear. I felt a profound sense of homecoming. My hands, once rough from working double shifts to buy Julian's textbooks, now held the pen that signed off on multi-million-dollar corporate ventures. My home is no longer filled with the heavy, tense silence of a failing marriage. It is filled with the soft music I love, the smell of fresh jasmine flowers, and the laughter of true friends who see me, value me, and respect my mind. The greatest betrayal was what I had done to myself, allowing my own light to be dimmed so that a fragile man could feel tall. True love does not ask you to hide your strength, it celebrates it. It does not demand your erasure to ensure its own comfort. I lost a husband, yes, but I found myself, and that is a trade I would make 1,000 times over. My dear friends, thank you for sitting with me today and listening to this story from the heart. It takes a long time to realize that when someone tries to hide you, it's usually because they are terrified of what will happen when the world sees how much brighter you shine than them. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I truly want you to think about it. Have you ever shrunk yourself or stayed hidden just to protect someone else's fragile pride? And if you did, how did you find the courage to finally step out into the light? Please share your thoughts and your own journeys with me in the comments below. Your stories of strength help heal this beautiful community. If this story touched your heart today, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Broken Trust Stories. Until next time, keep your head high, guard your peace, and remember that you are worthy of being seen exactly as you are.